PTF and Nick Tammaro for the In the Money Media YouTube channel. You can also check this out on audio if you subscribe to the In the Money Players podcast, wherever you get your pods. Loads of fun, exclusive audio content on there. And of course, we always encourage you to subscribe to the channel on the video side, just so you make sure you don't miss any of the stuff we have coming up, and it helps us out. Nick, we come here, we're talking on Monday after a loaded weekend of racing around North America, but we'll start with the one that most people are talking about, and that's the Haskell Stakes. Journalism, once again, seemingly pulling victory from the jaws of defeat. What did you think of this effort?
Yeah, it was awfully compelling, I would say. He is a horse that has a flair for the dramatic, no doubt about it. And this was one where I don't think his rider really put him in any kind of difficult position. He wasn't as sharp out of the gate, and I think that probably put him in a bit more of an uncomfortable spot early, a little bit farther back. There was some chatter online about the track being inside speed favoring, and Jerry Bailey kept talking about that on the NBC broadcast. And honestly, I don't think Jerry watches a lot of Monmouth because it really hasn't been inside speed favoring since maybe the 90s or early 2000s when it was. But if anything, the rail at Monmouth is a little bit off most days. So it was a very strong effort. It was he's a horse that I think is better when he has a target and he can produce that final move. I think that's part of the reason why Sovereignty's beaten him a couple of times. It also might be why he might be a little bit better at a mile and an eighth than he is at a mile and a quarter. So I think you've got to time him up very well. He's always going to struggle in a race where he has to outclose somebody else. So he just doesn't really have that gear shifting type ability. He's a little bit more steady grinding type. But he's a lot of fun. 101 Beyer speed figure, same number for Gosger, who has now run winning races twice, only to be beaten late by journalism. I think it's a safe bet. There's a meaningful race with Gosger's name on it out there, and in those hands, he'll definitely get better. I would expect as time goes by, and I thought it was a very good effort from Goal Oriented, who really showed that he's grown up a good bit since the Preakness, and he's gotten better. And I love that Bob Baffert came right out and said, we're going to the Travers. I saw some people say, oh, why do they keep throwing this horse to the Wolves, blah, blah, blah. I was like, come on. 101 Beyer and lost to Haskell by 3/4 of a length. He is 110% supposed to be in the Travers, right? What's he going to do, sit at home and run against a stablemate in the Pacific Classic? Like, come on. He's going to the Travers and he belongs there.
There's so much to unpack from what you've said already. But one thing I want to get to first, when you talk about how the mile and a quarter can work against journalism, it's not, I'm guessing you mean it's not so much because of what distance he wants as how you think that plays more into the hands of a Sovereignty. Talk to me about that a little bit more, that notion that you think he might be better at the mile and an eighth.
Yeah, he's a one-run horse, right? He's going to put in his run. It's going to be, you're not going to be able to elongate it very much. Sovereignty's a high cruising speed horse that feels like one where he can really decelerate slowly as opposed to everybody else who's decelerating a lot faster. So he can establish himself running and then stay around that same pace, where journalism is going to start grinding away and sort of try and wear you down. So at the mile and a quarter, when what Junior Alvarado has done so brilliantly twice before is he's basically just played journalism. And when journalism has moved, he's moved right behind him and he's been able to loop around him very easily. I think journalism is not really the kind of horse that you can say, okay, well, we'll just take him at the quarter pole and stave everybody else off, because he doesn't really have that kind of run. He can't really do that. I think he has a little bit of a tendency too when he hits the front to switch himself off, whereas Sovereignty just keeps on plugging away. And I think that's been his problem. So I'm intrigued to see it happen on maybe a bit more speed favoring surface or on a track outside of the eastern part of the United States where journalism theoretically might have an edge. Belmont's horses usually travel pretty well. So, I think what the connections are hesitant to do is have to play Sovereignty's game again. Right. And they would be playing Sovereignty's game if they went to the Travers. And I don't blame them, but I'm sure his stallion deal has a little bit of a nice incentive if he were to win a race like the Travers.
It's hard to know. We don't know the specifics. Sometimes stallion deals, it's just any grade one gets a certain bonus.
Which, if that box is checked, if he was my horse, he wouldn't leave California again.
Right. Would be potentially one of the paths is Pacific Classic Breeders' Cup. The other would be Travers Breeders' Cup. No decision has been made as of the work I was doing this morning, hunting around, unless you've heard anything in the last hour or so. I think they're going to wait and let the horse tell them to some degree. Journalism does seem like a horse who was clearly kicking down the stall that they decided to come and make this trip to Monmouth, and I'm sure they're glad they did. Let me tell you my fear. I'm a huge journalism fan. I'm going to get that. Everybody knows that. I pick the horse every time. I am a little bit worried that and I haven't seen pace figures yet, but it sure seemed like he didn't have the same early speed that we've seen. Seemed like it took a while getting after him before he produced that run. It feels like a horse, just watching back the tape of the Haskell, that maybe isn't one I want to be with next time. I do worry sometimes when horses, they can still put in huge efforts, but when they don't show that same early speed, it can sometimes be them negatively touting themselves of what's going to happen next. I want to be wrong, but that's sort of what my going to be my fear wherever he turns up next. Do you think it's founded at all?
No, I think it's legitimate. I mean, there's usually one of the biggest telltale signs with horses is how they run in the first furlong. So if you got a super sharp horse and they're dull out of the gate or they're slow into stride, they're going off form. And we sort of forget that with these 3-year-olds, we're asking them to be in form for a year, and it's a very hard thing to do. And it's very hard for a lot of very good trainers to do. And, I would be so bold as to go so far as to say, I don't really know how much the Wayne Lucas coaching tree is all that great at keeping colts good for an entire year. It's a super hard thing to do, right? It's really, really hard. It's really hard to take a horse like Journalism that ran last fall, stayed in training, ran in the spring, ran through all 3 legs of the Triple Crown, now ran in the Haskell. Even an exceptional horse like Point Given struggled to get through the Haskell and beat a horse who he would have generally beaten like a drum any other time, and then came back and really turned heads in the Travers. So maybe could there be a little bit of ring rust when you're only away for 5 weeks? I don't know. It seems like 6 weeks. Seems like it should probably be a little bit longer than that. But yeah, I think your concerns are legitimate. I wouldn't. I would be willing. I don't know if they want to go travel to take on Sovereignty on the road again when they could probably await something that's a little bit easier. Of course, there is no 3-year-old race out west aside from the Shared Belief, which I don't really know if you're running this horse in the Shared Belief with a straight face. So it becomes a concern there. I mean, really, your only other option is the Pennsylvania Derby.
Right, and that would give him a little bit more time. But again, it's a ship. I mean, I think if nobody asked me, and they shouldn't, but it sure does make sense that Pacific Classic, older horses, but I guess we have to look. I mean, who are we from sitting here now, several weeks out, afraid of in that race?
Nysos is it. But the other thing is Nysos, the 1.25 would be a new thing for him, right? And there's nobody else in that division out there. So unless somebody is shipping west, which does not seem likely because the Jockey Club Gold Cup is the same weekend, and the horses that are on the East Coast are going to stay over there. I don't think Todd is sending one of Fierceness or Mindframe out for the Pacific Classic. So, I mean, the Hollywood Gold Cup was won by Skippy Longstocking, who's a grade 2 handicap horse.
Right.
And the Santa Anita Handicap was won by Locked, who, again, he's not running out there. Obviously, there's common ownership with Journalism. Right. So, yeah, there's nothing to fear. I would keep him at home if that was an option that was really on the table.
Where should we go? I'll let you help me program the show here. Should we talk more Monmouth? Should we zip up to Saratoga? What else should we?
I suppose we could probably knock out Monmouth, once and for all. I think there are a couple other meaningful graded stakes that were won by Chad Brown.
Yes, he had a good day, didn't he? Let's talk about redistricting first. A 101 Beyer speed figure in that United Nations showed a new dimension, being able to go longer. Do you think this will be his bag going forward? I mean, is this going to be a Breeders' Cup Turf kind of horse?
I think it kind of has to be. I just don't know what their other options are, and I know the connections were a little lost after the Old Forester race, and we're trying to figure out what to do. And the topic of going long arose, which I actually thought he was probably going to be a little bit better going shorter. So I was wrong about that. But occasionally, when you see a horse that can't quite quicken at the 9 furlongs, a lot of times they can be better at the Stayers race. And maybe he's just that, right? He's got that European pedigree that I believe he's a Lope de Vega that gives you that kind of look at being able to go a little bit longer. If he's not a Lope de Vega, he's a Kingman. But
I think he's Kingman.
Okay, so that it makes sense, and obviously Seth Klarman loves these European pedigrees and loves Kingmans. So yeah, it was good. It was a good effort. You know, it was an inferior field, but Chad came out afterwards and has already sort of has shown his annoyance for the Saratoga Stakes schedule and said the sword dancer is coming back too quickly, which was a move that was made, I guess, to avoid some crossover with the Kentucky Turf Cup. But count me among those that's not a huge fan of moving Saratoga Stakes for Kentucky Downs races. I understand why they would do it. But yeah, so I don't know where they'll go, to be honest. I don't really know if he'll go to Kentucky for a race at Kentucky Downs. And so there really aren't going to be a whole ton of options for him outside of maybe going to Woodbine, would be
Yeah,
the thing that they would consider.
yeah, that's interesting. We'll see what happens. Chad Brown, very outspoken about that stake schedule, and also just somebody who, generally speaking, he's very good at the game of deciding where to put these horses. I'd say he rarely puts a foot wrong when it comes to making
Right.
those kind of decisions. We'll see where redistricting turns up next. Certainly would have to get faster to compete with the presumed European runners who'd be coming over for a race like the Breeders' Cup Turf, but valuable prizes before then. And if the horse continues to get better, he is the rare U.S. trainer who's had success tackling some of those big international operations at the Breeders' Cup in that turf race before. Let's pivot and talk about the other Chad Brown runner, Randomized, getting back to form in the Mali Pitcher. What did you think of this effort in this race overall?
Yeah, randomized felt like a mare that probably needed something to go a little different. You know, maybe a little. This was sort of like going to the backup quarterback. Not that Flavian Pratt's a backup for anybody, but going to a different rider that probably is a little bit more pace heavy, a little bit more pace oriented. She just needs the lead. You know, it's that simple. She needs the lead. You can't fool around with her. She needs the lead. She needs to see open space. She can't rate. It seems like she's become more resistant to rating as she's gotten older, which isn't all that surprising. And so now that she got the lead, she was able to dictate terms to everybody else. You know, Pete, you kind of have to acknowledge this race through a division that was already in sort of a disarray into more upheaval because Dorth Vader was the most recent Grade 1 winner. Candide was a good looking Grade 3 winner in May who looked like she had a ton of upside. And she beat both of them off of two pretty crappy races. So, you know, it kind of made the division look even more sort of stretched. And I think one of the races I'm looking forward to most for Travers weekend is the Personal Ensign because you're going to have randomized. You'll have obviously the Shuvi winner, Leslie's Rose, come back against Torpedo Anna, who's going to be coming in off a layoff for her, which she's almost never runs off 45 plus day breaks. So that's going to be a really fun race. I did like randomized effort. I think a 98 buyer speed figure,
Yeah.
which is one of her better numbers, definitely her best number this year. And I would assume that you'll see Majestic Oops and or Candide maybe come out of there. Dorth Vader will probably go home to Saratoga and run in there as well.
Let's talk about the Coaching Club American Oaks up at Saratoga, won by Scottish Lassie with a 99 buyer speed figure. Were you impressed with this effort? What did you think of the race in general?
Yeah, you know, Jorge Abreu is a very, very good trainer, very, very talented, and he touted Scottish Lassie from very early on. There was a lot of discussion around the Twitterverse and on the Clocker report. She was very highly regarded. She delivered him his first Grade 1, and now she delivered him his first Grade 1 at Saratoga. So credit to Joel Rosario for putting this horse on the lead. And Joel's very good on the front end. That's what frustrates some of us about how often he doesn't end up there. But she was incredible. I mean, she just absolutely buried the field. I don't know why the Chad Summers horse was not on the lead. My understanding is he was not pleased about that and actually removed Jose Lascano from a mount yesterday. That was a winner. So that'll be a double mount fee situation. So I don't know what the thought process was there. So obviously, take nothing away from Scottish Lassie, who was outstanding. Posted the highest buyer speed figure for a 3-year-old dirt filly of the year so far, which I believe actually would put her. I think it puts her in the mix for as fast outside of the Travers as Torpedo Anna ran all of last year. Now,
Yeah.
again, I mean, I'm not saying that they're on the same. It was a 99, so yeah, it was right. It was in the same range. I'm not saying they're the same horse by any means, but obviously, horses their hearts can swell when they get alone on the lead, especially in a dirt route. And I think that was the case with Scottish Lassie. The other part of the story, Pete, is Immersive hasn't gotten any better as a 3-year-old. And Maggie made the damning Maggie comment that you don't want to hear about a quality 2-year-old, and she said this horse just doesn't look like she's moved forward. She looks the same as she did last year. And so much of it is when you're the varsity basketball player that got good as a sophomore, by your senior year, a lot of the other people are good too, right? So you don't have that inherent advantage. And obviously that was the case with Immersive, who was better than the rest of her generation last year, and at this point just isn't.
It was a funny race from a form studying perspective, because normally I go into that situation trying to beat an Immersive, and I fell for a hook, line, and sinker in the spot. I think because I was envisioning a different kind of a pace scenario where maybe those two would be knocking heads up front ahead of her, and I got it wrong, and I'm absolutely willing to accept the narrative you just put forth that she just hasn't really trained on. But it's weird because usually I'm looking. I don't know what it was about her, but I was not inclined to beat Immersive, and then I felt silly.
Yeah, I mean, and I think part of it is we're just accustomed to these Brad Cox horses delivering, but they're not machines.
Right.
And this was a rough weekend for all the Brad Cox is a big cheat crowd, right? I mean, it was Brad didn't have a great weekend, right? Because Brad is somebody who's playing the game, and the game's hard, you
Yeah.
know. And so it was a dull effort from her, and I was surprised. I expected better. And I don't know really where they go from here. I know their plan was to go to the cotillion, but she might need softer competition, and there's just nowhere to find it because she doesn't have any conditions.
Right, right. It'll be interesting to see what they decide to do
I
with
would
her.
train her up to the Houston Ladies Classic if I was Brad.
Well, there, yeah, no enlightened self-interest there at all, Nick.
Right, none.
From a speed figure point of view, one of the most impressive, or the most impressive, I'm not going to hedge, race was Bookham Dano, a 111 by her speed figure in the Alfred Vanderbilt. This is a horse that's so popular and so fun, and gets the job done again.
He's the coolest, right? I mean, and you and I have vested interest now being in with the Bucaro stud crowd. But all kidding aside, I mean, if you don't like this horse, like you're not going to like racing, right? He's the other thing. Speaking of a comment that Maggie made on the show on Saturday, she said that from the time Bookham Dano got on the track, Paco had him active. And I feel like it's like such a microcosm of him as a horse, right? He's this plucky, hard trying underdog type that just fires every time. He's always on the move, and the great thing about this horse, and Paco has really made for a perfect passenger for him, is that he has made him so much more aggressive early. And you can see Paco's getting after him right out of the gate. He's putting him in there. They showed the drone shot, and then going to the turn, you saw him angle out, and you were like, man, if he's this close to these horses, there's no way he's going to lose, right? And so he has that sort of odd ability now. He's developing it more so as a 4-year-old of staying close to a fast pace. I mean, this was a race where he made it abundantly clear, if you're going to beat him at 6 furlongs in November, you're going to have to run your ass off, because he's not coming from 5 or 6 lengths out. He's coming for you early. And I thought with the scratch of Skelly and then a Full Moon Madness that it might give Mulligan a sneaky advantage. And Jose Ortiz rode a perfect race on Mulligan. I mean, maybe he could have been a little bit more aggressive to try and clear Damon's mound, but there's a limit to how quick you can go. Bookham Dano reeled him in very easily. Mulligan has now run arguably three winning races in this season and is 0 for 3 because the division has a lot more depth than we probably expected.
Bookham Dano, I think it's a good example, too, of sort of the opposite of what I was describing before when I was talking about my fear about a horse like journalism maybe not showing as much early pace. When they can show more early pace and still finish, I mean, this is a Sean Borman thing, that's often a sign that they haven't even reached their ceiling. And if he hasn't reached his ceiling and he's running 111s, the best could be yet to come for Bookham Dano. Would you accept that hypothesis?
Oh, 100%. I'm totally on board with that. And I do think you look through his PPs and you see where he struggled last year. And it was a lot of situations where Irad thought he was doing the right thing, but he wasn't, quite simply. Stuck inside in the Cigar Mile, stuck inside in the Lafayette, trying to weave his way between horses. This is a horse with a good turn of foot, a lot of natural speed. He needs to be kept in the clear. He needs to be able to use a target. And pretty much everything Paco's done in his 3 starts this year is what wasn't done in his worst efforts last year. He was stuck inside. He was trying to come through. He was just in a series of bad spots. And he's a horse that Paco now fits to me like a glove, being that he likes to keep him active and keep him surging through in there. And I'll tell you what, this is as much as I've liked a horse that I've really never made any money on, and needed for a huge score when he lost at Churchill. So, but it doesn't matter. He ran a great race that day, and I still think if you give him Mindframe's trip, he wins that race by a length and a half.
It's not a crazy notion whatsoever. We don't talk about all the grade threes on such a loaded weekend, but I do want to have a word from you about Future Is Now, just because this 99 buyer speed figure impressed me and feels like it could be a divisional player among these filly and mare turf sprinters. Were you as impressed as I was with Future Is Now?
Yeah, I mean, look, on her best day, she's very solid, right? And I mean, we saw AG Bullet run as well as she did in last year's Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. So what's not to say that Future Is Now isn't capable of really having a major say in this fall's Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint? And I think Paco was a little more aggressive with her as well, which made a big difference. And she's a horse with a lot of speed, so she needs to be engaged from pretty early on. I'm not surprised she turned the tables on Pipsy. I kind of expected it. But it was nice. It was a good effort. She's a nice horse. And sort of ironic that on Haskell Day, Paco's two biggest mounts both came at Saratoga, and he was there and won on both.
Yeah, he can move his game around, and we like that type of aggressiveness that he's known for, and it can be sometimes in contrast to the riding colony in New York, as noted many times. Let's talk about Del Mar. The San Clemente thought process made a successful return to the races. The figure did not come back super fast, an 85 for thought process, suggesting that more development's going to need to occur as the season goes on if there's going to be more valuable prizes outside of her own division. It was an easy win, 2-1, like a 2-5 shot should, I suppose. What do you think about thought process going forward?
Yeah, it was almost as if the riding colony there had watched a lot of Saratoga all day, and when somebody went out and got the lead, they all said, "Okay, you can have it." And it was a shockingly slow pace for a West Coast turf race, where usually there's a little more early interest. And there was a Baffert horse that cleared on the outside, sort of threw out the anchor down the backstretch, and that really slowed things down. I liked Will Then in there, who got no setup whatsoever and actually ran on pretty well. But thought process is good. The good thing about her, obviously, is she's fast early. She can be positioned just about anywhere. So this was an awfully facile win. The key, to me, this is no different than most years with these Del Mar races, which is somebody going to ship in for the Del Mar Oaks, right? If somebody ships in for the Del Mar Oaks, and we have these 10 million 3-year-old filly turf races on the eastern part of the United States, if somebody comes in for one of those, I think there's nine or 10 horses entered in the Lake George next week. It would come back somewhat quickly off of that, but maybe somebody does. Maybe somebody comes from the Belmont Oaks, something like that. They can beat Thought Process, right? That's a certainty. Thought Process is better than Ice Cream, You Scream, who I didn't like last year, and then she won the Del Mar Oaks. But this was a pretty soft trip. It was a slow pace. She capitalized on it. She did what she was supposed to do at a short price. But I mean, it's nothing that anybody who was considering shipping out there to run in a Grade 1 should fear.
Right. I wonder, I hadn't thought of this until you were talking. Did the slow pace potentially make it harder for her to earn a strong
Sure.
figure? She could have maybe,
Oh, yeah.
5 to 7 points in hand based on that. I mean, she did what she needed to do, but yeah, it wouldn't be terrifying anybody thinking about it, though. Having just taken a quick look at the Lake George, I mean, the 85 figure the thought process ran wouldn't look bad against that group, right? I mean, there's no real speed demons in there on the clock yet.
No, 85 is solid this time of year. She just happens to be a horse who is fast at 2, which, the outlier for her, those 84, 82 and 84 figs she was running earlier in her career. But no, I mean, they went 48-1 to the half in here, and Almendarez in the Wicker an hour or so earlier, they went 46 flat in there and finished up in 34-2. So, I mean, pace wise, they were 18 points slower to the half mile. And it ended up being a 15-point difference in the end. So, yeah, I would say you don't want to give her, from a speed figure perspective, you don't want to go too nuts on being against her, because there's undoubtedly better there if she's in a quicker paced race. And then the question becomes, well, will she finish as effectively in a quicker paced race? That's what you'd want to worry about. It doesn't look to me like a 1 1/8 will give her any harm.
let's jump around a little here. I do want to shout out our friends at Woodbine, who had their big prep day for the King's Plate, which I kept annoyingly on TV calling the Queen's Plate, even though it's been a couple of years now. I should have that straight in my head. Want to just at least shout out Woodbine Oaks winner No Time, who actually went faster on the Beyer scale than Sedbury's Ghost, who won the plate trial. I wonder if once again we could have a year where the Woodbine Oaks winner is among the most likely winners in the King's Plate. Looking at the figures, it feels that way. What did you think of any of the racing from Woodbine on Sunday?
Well, Pete, I'm not going to lie, and I want to be a full disclosure on here. I'm looking at it for the first time right now.
Okay.
But I do see that No Time was an impressive winner of a 2 Life 2 Back and then ran in the Celine and underperformed. But John Velasquez went up and took them out. And obviously, I guess it was a combination of distance and getting the right trip from a little bit off of it. So she looks like a filly. Yeah, as you're saying, it is remarkable how well the fillies have performed in this race. I do think one of the things that's notable about the difference in final times is they really flew in the play trial, and the pace came apart quite a bit. I mean, the two 1, 2, 3, 4 finishers all came from deep in it. I mean, looking at the chart, I would say a horse like Scorching is supposed to be incredibly interesting coming out of there. Whether he can handle more distance or not would be the big worry. But he's a horse that had just run second in the Marine. He was always within range of this super fast pace and stayed on quite well to finish third, beating just a couple lengths. So that would be my inclination looking at it first time around.
I like that idea. What else? Any other performances over the weekend? Doesn't even have to be a stakes race. Anybody who caught your eye? Anybody you're particularly interested in betting back, or just somebody we should at least shout out for their efforts anywhere in North America?
I think we covered the big spots on at Saratoga at least. The only maybe stake we didn't touch on was a win by Leslie's Rose. I think we mentioned briefly on Friday in the Shoe V. It was one of the quicker distaff division races of the year, which is a good thing. We were trying to see that division really start to develop a little bit. We've been a little bit on the shorter end of good 2-year-old performances so far. So I'm a little. I guess I'm hoping something comes up quickly because we haven't seen very many of them. Obviously, Ewing was very impressive, and he'll potentially run against Obliteration in a couple of weeks at Saratoga. Would be looking forward to that. The winner of the Honorable Miss on Sunday afternoon, Helena's Forte, paid $50 with Irad, who somehow has a $3.79 ROI at the meet. Came up the inside. Inside got good when it rained a little bit, which is a little atypical, but we've seen it happen now a couple times at the meet. So those would kind of be the highlights there. And out west, there was a good 2-year-old race on Friday, opening day, I believe, where Lawali ran down a Bob Baffert horse. That was, I think I'm quoting the race right, but we'll see some good 2-year-old racing obviously out there as time goes by with the best pal on the horizon and more to come.
We'll be back with Baby Talk episodes starting in August. We'll be looking at that every weekend. Maybe we'll pull you in to get some more thoughts. That's about it for this segment. You've heard what we think, folks. We want to hear what you think. So let us know in the comments if what's journalism going to do next time. Is it from a figure point of view? This was a 101. Is he going to bounce back to some of those bigger numbers, or could fears about the direction of his form be well founded? I hate even saying it because I'm such a fan of the horse, but I got to call it like I see it. Let us know in the comments what you think. Subscribe to the In the Money Media YouTube channel while you're over here. Nick, really appreciate having you on today, and we'll do some handicapping later in the week.
Sounds great, my friend.